Hi, I'm Heather Roberge. I'm chair of the Department of Architecture and Urban Design. Tonight I have the great pleasure of introducing this year's distinguished alumni lecture by Kai-Uwe Bergmann, partner at BIG and fellow of the American Institute of Architects. BIG is a Copenhagen, New York, London, and Barcelona, soon to be LA-based group of architects, designers, urbanists, landscape professionals, interior and product designers, researchers, and inventors. BIG's architecture emerges out of a careful analysis of how contemporary life constantly evolves and changes, and how architecture and planning might reorganize human response and lifestyles. Kai is a 1993 graduate of UCLA, where he earned a Master of Architecture degree, graduating with 2 of the school's top prizes, including Best Thesis. Since 2006, Kai-Uwe has worked for BIG, helping to establish the firm as champions and promoters of architecture's capacity to imagine optimistic futures. Kai leads BIG's business development, which currently has the office working in over 35 different countries. He also oversees BIG's urban scale projects and supports their landscape projects. His most recent contribution was to the Resiliency Plan, Big U, to protect 10 miles of Manhattan's southern coastline. First envisioned through the Rebuild by Design competition to develop proactive responses to Superstorm Sandy, it's now being further developed with construction to begin in 2020. I'm perhaps most impressed by BIG's skill and indeed command of communications. They produce extraordinarily direct projects so abridged as to become immediately iconic and cogent. Their projects are conceived with pragmatism, ease, and vision. These are the easy projects, so convincingly argued for by our former colleague, Bob Somel. BIG knows audience and is not content to simply reaffirm popular culture. They ask us to linger on our present circumstances, to consider emerging realities, and to take pleasure in our collective ability to imagine change. They communicate about important, complex issues with a matter-of-factness that instills both confidence and manageable levels of concern. BIG has no small ambitions. This is summarized in their own words with this quote: "Since we know from our past that our future is bound to be different from our present, rather than waiting for it to happen on its own, we have the power to give it form." Please join me in welcoming Kai-Uwe.
Yeah, I was going to do the same. All right. I don't think we had distinguished alumni lectures when I went here so many moons ago, and it was certainly quite the honor to receive the invitation. It's been, I have a love affair, of course, as many of you, with Los Angeles, and I think it was instrumental in how I've actually developed as an architect. So what I'd like to actually do is, unlike many or most lectures, is to talk a little bit about myself and how I became an architect, and then also how I actually have turned that into a lot of the things that make BIG and the work that we do there quite special to me. So I'm going to start with the day after graduation from UCLA. I had gone straight from the University of Virginia, Thomas Jefferson's academic village, for an undergraduate degree, straight into graduate school. This is the early 90s. Many of you may remember a recession. George Bush the first was president. I think there was about a 30% unemployment rate amongst architects. People were paying to work in New York at different offices. And that was kind of letting me know that I needed to go back into school and spend those and learn. So that was 6 years. And after school, after I had the great Ben Refuerzo, Frank Israel, Buzz Udell, Dagmar Richter, all teaching me here at UCLA, I actually graduated and I thought that I knew almost nothing about building. And it's because, you spend all these years kind of making models out of basswood and cardboard, and you theorize about a lot of different concepts. And Sylvia Lavin was just beginning her teachings in seminars, and all of that is actually super important. But I felt very little the actual act of building. And so I had read a book, Narcissismus and Goldmund by Hermann Hesse, when I was a student. And in it are two brothers. One brother decides to go into the clergy and goes to become a monk. And the other brother goes on what is called auf der Walz, or on an apprenticeship. And they spend basically 3 years in the clergy, just going into church and in the monastery. And then the other brother going around the world and experiencing all these different things. And then they come back together. And I think that what the book teaches us is that no matter if you're standing still or if you're physically moving, you have a world of experiences that you can experience and share. So the two brothers each were teaching each other about what solitude and meditation was to kind of physical experience and stimulation. So I really liked the brother who went out in the world. So I decided to just basically take off and travel for about 3 years and do different apprenticeships. So this is a kind of collection of those apprenticeships. I went to Germany, to Mali, to Switzerland, to Italy, to Russia, to Lithuania, and to Sweden in those 3 years after school. I worked with a bunch of carpenters in Germany, making formwork and then pouring concrete. With that money, I then traveled through Mali in West Africa, where I actually then spent a couple of months working in a village because they get everybody together, and for a month they just basically fix things around the village. So I was in the fixing team, and there was the guy who made sure that everything was plumb and right angles. We made all of our bricks. We did all of the kind of mixtures. Then I got a phone call, or I think I called Robert Mangurian from SciArc, and he was in need of a kind of a teaching assistant. So I went to Hadrian's Villa. This is where we were discovering a tunnel system underneath Hadrian's Villa that then led to a major discovery, which was the kitchen, or the former kind of ice vault, where the Romans would bring huge blocks of ice from the Dolomites and would then set them underground. And Marianne Ray and Robert were just sort of like literally feeling out what these spaces could be and then documenting them for over 10 years, over a decade, with large groups of UCLA students and SciArc students. I then traveled up into Lithuania. The Baltics had just kind of become free, so I worked for a stonemason, Lionginas Verbickas, a sculptor. He worked in Carrara marble and different types of granite. I went to go see the Kiji churches. These are churches that don't use a single nail. Everything is like dovetailed and fitted together. And it's in sort of northern Siberia. Ended up in Sweden, where I went to a glass school in Orrefors and learned how to blow glass and cast glass. And that literally then ended up with me moving to Seattle, where I went to the Pilchuck Glass School. This was a funny project actually made of ice blocks with Dante Mariano. So all of this to just say that over the years, I kind of have desired a kind of knowledge about materials, like what we actually build with in architecture. to then, not master any of these things, but to just know the language and to understand if I'm speaking to different craftsmen and different workers on the field, that I could basically speak their language. So that now has led to this, which is working at BIG. We're nearing about 600 architects in those physical places that were just mentioned. And I want to kind of talk about this evening about what was also mentioned, sort of giving form to the future. This is the Danish word for architecture, which is formgivning. Giving form to the future is, I think, really one of the hardest things that you can do, because it's giving form to that which is not yet there. And so, of course, a lot of that means also of understanding where you're coming from, understanding history, but also in a way projecting and kind of trying to understand where things are going and heading. So we have an exhibition that's up right now in Denmark. It'll move to Milan for the Salone in April. You move up the stairs and you can see that it's a time kind of a lapse where then the images on the walls are corresponding to discoveries of tools and techne that happened at the same time. And so you can sort of start seeing the development. We also had Lego builders. These folks are AFOLs, adult fans of Lego. They spend their own time and their own resources to literally rebuild things that they are inspired by. And 35 of our projects have been rebuilt in Lego by these AFOLs. And so we wanted to celebrate that. Also because it's a building block, and architecture is most often broken down into building blocks or sizable elements. So, just seeing how children seem to have endless creativity by using a finite number of sizes and scale of objects. And then we, I think, in the architecture world, start to kind of get sort of stubborn and a little bit dumbed down into just what's available and sort of rehashing a lot of different project types and typologies, when in actuality we have the same limitless horizon of things that we could be doing. So you then, as you move from the Big Bang is where we start, 13.8 billion years, billion years before, and then basically move to the Forum, which is now about 100 of our projects that are shown in some stages of process and or completion. These are all broken into different kind of filters. The filters, like the yellow brick road, flow down the stairs into 4 visions of the future. The vision of sensing, of making, of thinking, and of moving. This is a little bit what I'd like to sort of, through a series of projects tonight, show you what we mean by all of this. And of course, this is sort of ending with the Mars City project of looking at even interplanetary kind of colonization. William Gibson stated, the future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed. So I think what William Gibson means is that we don't know what the future is, and the future's out there, but in reality, little futures are all around us. And it's literally just sort of making and looking for them and staying sort of, and making the connection between something that someone is experimenting with or trying and then doing. So when you think of the planet, there's lots, millions, if not billions of tries of what that future might be. So I'm going to show you through a series of projects arranged from the smallest scale to the largest scale in our office currently, where I believe these little futures kind of exist, and that at the end of this evening, I hope that we are taking a sort of a bigger leap into that future. So at 150 square feet, this is a cabin that we've designed that is to be buildable by basically 2 people over 3 to 4 weeks. It's all palletized, and it's basically about $70,000. And it's off-grid. It can be built onto just a small, shallow kind of 4 concrete footings. And, it's nothing new. I mean, A-frames are something that are relatively known as a form, but I still think that there's a certain kind of thoughtfulness that's given to this project, just to truly think about how this fits into the landscape and how to create, I think, a very generous interior. So this is, there are 2 beds. There's a queen-size bed down below, and there's a queen-size bed as well up above. There's a little kitchenette that also runs off of solar, and then a bathroom that's tucked away over onto the left. So the idea here is to just have a minimal footprint, and in reality, it's also sort of acknowledging that a lot of people are living in cities and have a disconnected life from the nature, many of whom probably would like to spend some time in nature, and this is a means of actually allowing that or providing for that. So here you have, again, sort of just a very nice bathroom, not something you expect in a camper kind of experience. And then, you can set this in a number of different locations. So this is really like a product, and that's why it was mentioned that we do kind of like the big leap. Big leap is transitioning from just an architecture office to one that thinks about landscape, engineering, architecture, and products holistically and kind of all at once. Again, nothing new, because I'm Kunstwerk, the Bauhaus. These things have been tried before, but it's our feeling that we've lost some of that in specializing and sort of kind of balkanizing a lot of these different interests, and we see within our projects that we would like to bring that back in together. 7,000 square feet. This gentleman came to us, to our office, Kim Lautrup. He basically said there are about 40,000 students in Copenhagen that don't have dorm rooms. The city nor the schools really feel it's their obligation to build dorms. So most often parents are left to find studio apartments, and then basically they're spread all over the city. So there's like no real dorm life as you would think about it. And his son was still living with him, and so the brief when he came into our office is "Get my son out of my house." As short as that. And so he was trying. He literally wanted to become an investor, a developer, for us to think about it. So we considered upcycling containers. You may know that Denmark is a small country, but it's one of the largest shipping countries on the planet. So there are a lot of shipping containers at the end of every sort of season. And so it's something that you can actually pick up for almost no cost if you can take it off their hands. And we looked, for us, the reuse of the shipping container was not what was important. For us, it was actually trying to think through and develop the social life that the shipping container either reinforces or destroys. And so we basically are looking at stacking and arranging the shipping containers in such ways to reinforce a social life, a social landscape that we were really trying to push for. We're using renewable energy. We're using the heat and or coolness of the water. We have a PV system on a roof. And so this is all driven to create something that is very much reducing the need for fossil fuels and or even landscape or a site. So these are floating on concrete pontoons, and they can literally be built for half the cost and in 1/3 the time that a typical dorm room would basically would cost the school or the government or the parent. So here you can see how it's broken up. It even has a little bit of landscape and a seating area. In the center, there are 12 units of housing held within 9 units of containers. Even the pontoon concrete also allows and offers some space for the kids to socialize. These are, basic, building blocks. All this work was done in Poland and then shipped over. And now it's literally a real community of people. This bed is about $600 a month, and you have the same view as the $1,200 a night Marriott 5-star hotel, which is very close by. The city liked the prototype, so we co-funded the prototype along with Kim. They then went into production, and the city of Copenhagen ordered 5 more. So there's now 72 student dorms. Gothenburg, a city in France, also have purchased them. And it's, again, a little bit like the Klein Cabin product that has been developed. So these were just delivered a week ago for the climate conference that just happened or the C40 Mayor's Conference that just happened. And here's a little experience of what it's like. So I don't know about you, but I'd love to be a student again and live in one of these. So, most important thing, he moved out of his house, his dad's house. So he's living in the floating home. So we have a happy client. 13,000 square feet. Noma may be known or not to you. It's a restaurant. It really had developed the whole kind of idea of foraging and using the foods that are available in a given season. It's very much a kind of seafood place, and then you kind of eat roots all winter long, and then it goes back to meat in the spring. But these are they're works of art. I've had the chance to eat there a couple of times, and it was the first time that I had a dessert while I was there, and it was the same taste as I had in my grandmother's kitchen when I was 5 or 6. And I had not remembered that taste in all that period of time, and somehow they kind of awakened it. So they do some incredible magic. So what they had done is they had purchased a bastion, basically an artillery kind of warehouse, and we constructed a village of buildings in and around it because it was a historic bastion, so you couldn't really touch it. But we were allowed to build these different village. It's really a food village. Each of those structures does a different thing. There's a pickling place. There's a kind of barbecue place. There's a eating place, a reception. Then, of course, the greenhouses. So everything is sort of. They have also here a seaweed farm and doing a lot of things in the water as well. So. Many people kind of associated big with very big things, and we actually work at a lot of different scales. So this is also to hopefully broaden your thinking or thoughts of what big does. So this is for us just as important a project as the ski slope and the power plant. But this sort of allows you to sort of come in, and what the desired effect here is to literally bring you into someone's home. So everything is very domesticized. just the fireplace, the brick. You kind of see little stools for the kids to kind of hunker down. And then you move into a waiting area before you're seated. Interestingly, the waiting area looks at our ski slope power plant. And then there's a prep kitchen, and then the dining area. So, it's a very small group of people. I think there are 2 seatings within an evening, and it gets quite bustling when everybody's there. There are probably as many cooks and servers as there are patrons. And for us, it's just it's the whole idea of kind of food. I think thinking about the future of food and the future of how we eat is actually a fundamental piece in thinking about the future. And this is, of course, at the kind of high end, but Renee Rzepski, who's the chief chef, is very concerned also about just food in the future throughout the world, and has been traveling and sort of documenting different types of food on all ends of the spectrum. So I think he's also someone that we hold very dear and close as a friendship, to be able to sort of see where that takes us. 14,000 square feet, so we haven't really increased that much, but this is in Norway. It just opened a few weeks ago, and this is an old 19th century textile mill where a philanthropist has now turned the entire mill and all of its forest into a sculpture garden. And it's probably the largest private collection of art in all of Norway. The brief, a few architects were invited to kind of enjoy the brief. You can see the mill sort of in the center top. And it was to just add gallery space onto the mill. We went there and we looked at the landscape, and it's a very large kind of Storm King-like collection of sculpture, also like here on the campus. And we noticed that people tended to go down and around back to the mill, and then up and around and back to the mill. So it wasn't the ideal kind of movement. So instead of building a gallery adjacent to the old mill, we proposed to build a gallery that serves as a bridge to connect the 2 sides of the river and thus create a loop that people could take. The building itself would then also become a piece of sculpture, just like the sculptures themselves. And so this is the finished product, and it is also kind of a vertical that moves and twists to a horizontal. It's made only of straight elements, so the glass does curve, but the facade elements are all straight. And we just tried to kind of curve the glass in as few places as possible, just to sort of meet the budget. You can imagine that was a kind of a very difficult thing. And then here you can see how the gallery allows for a wide range of spaces for the art. And then you move and you have the view back to the mill from the horizontal gallery. So this is how we kind of imagined it, and then this is how it was resolved. And again, this is how we imagined it sitting there. The kind of gymnastics that it requires. AKT were the engineers, which are London-based. And it just, it really was it took about 7 or 8 years to get it built. Working with a lot of metal fabricators who said that it couldn't be done for the price. 25,000 square feet. Again, still modest. This is actually Bjarke's high school a high school that the mathematician, his math teacher became the principal of the school. And this is maybe our 6th or 7th project. So we had just had a few kind of projects in Copenhagen that were built at the time. And then the principal called him and said, please, Bjarke, can you help us with our new kind of multi-purpose hall, which is what the little bump that you see there in the center. And there was no place to really build an addition to the school because they have a playground or a courtyard that was very important in Bjarke's time there. And so the school had proposed to build the addition in the soccer field. And Bjarke kind of realized that, he would not make friends at the school if he abolished the soccer fields. So the idea actually came to submerge it in the courtyard to allow for both activities on the roof as well as using the area down below. And then to impress the math teacher, he used a formula for the ballistic arch. And it's a handball court. So you just basically take a handball, throw it, and then that's the shape of the roof. Needless to say, the math teacher was very proud of that moment. And we still brought in natural light around the edge, very low-key materials, just a raw concrete and a kind of all-purpose floor. But they do everything down there. They take tests, they hold dances, and then, of course, all kinds of sports. Again, for us, the success of this was actually how the roof would be used. And we kind of had what we called the lazy bench, and then we had the flower petals and a couple of other kind of seating. And the success of this place was the janitor actually told us he was very upset because he now has to do about 4 times the cleanup than he normally would before this was built. So he has 4 times more trash cans and 4 times more litter around. So it's good when the janitors are upset in a building. And then during graduation, they have everybody stands on top of the little mound, and all the parents get to see their kids. 70,000 square feet. So this is in a kind of nondescript area of Copenhagen. It's a kind of a backyard, so to speak. It's not on any major avenues, and it's an affordable housing project. Most people would tell you that affordability comes from stacking things and aligning things and basically bringing it down to kind of the dumbest amount of units. We felt that wouldn't there be a possibility to actually bring generosity back into affordability? So we, of course, realized that building blocks and repetition are very important, but we also felt that maybe you could do that and still build something that is very site-specific, that looks at the kind of urban condition of the site, that also looks at finding ways to put space and place where people could most take advantage of it. So we have prefabricated basic elements, and then we arrange them in a kind of curvilinear sort of way. We have a back side, we have a front side. The front side offers also an indoor-outdoor relationship with the balconies. And most important, by pulling apart the individual kind of prefab units, you end up with another 2.5 to 3 feet of clearance between those elements. So this is the kind of kitchen and dining room area and balcony where you have about 11.5 to 12 feet to the ceiling. And then you walk up to the bedrooms pods that are on either side of it, so which are more intimate. And this was just a kind of way that we could create the affordability. We could push the storefront back and create a kind of outdoor quality as well. That I think the residents really resonates with them. And huge long waiting lists to get into this project. So I think one of the nicest things about working in a Scandinavian country is really the kind of that there isn't a discrepancy between different types of housing, and that affordable housing gets the same care or design effort that market rate and or luxury housing gets. 112,000 square feet, so we just broke the 100,000 barrier. Lego, land of Lego, Denmark. So I think every architect probably dreams of getting one of their projects into a Lego set, and the only way that we ever thought we would is by designing the Lego Museum, so went ahead and did that. Lego was kind enough for our presentation model to give us 70,000 bricks, so we spent a month building this guy, which is proving a couple of points. The point is that this is a direct scaled model of the building, and it is built to the size of a brick. So meaning that we kind of like looked at their product, and then we scaled up to a point where we could then build in real materials and replicate. So no tiles were cut in this project. Everything was literally the actual product size, if that makes sense. So this is the built project in Bieland. Bieland is only about 6,000 people, and half of them work with the company. So it is a true company town. And the other thing to realize that's very Danish is that the ground floor is free and open to the public, and the roof of the project is open to the public. And only the 3 floors in between are basically a charged museum. So this is a building that fits into its kind of urban context. People kind of inhabit the building and just like meet me at the steps. At the top we have a keystone with little skylights that look down. Kids are basically active and inside and outside. The other thing that's a little hard to notice, but we have no columns in the building. These are built as Verandil trusses, and they literally are sitting one on top of the other, so the entire building is like a super arch of Verandil trusses. So again, trying to make sure that the engineering of the project also speaks to the actual use of the product. And there are a lot of different kind of Lego experiences. The AFOLs are in heaven. And then you move from the top floors into the vault at the base of the building, the basement, which has one Lego set of every Lego set ever made, including the one that I got in 1983 of the Yellow Castle, which was the first set that you had Lego people in the set. So this was a big kind of architectural milestone in my career, getting this Lego set right here. So and being able to work on a project that is that meaningful to a community is pretty great. 600,000 square feet. So we're really doubling the space. I'm going to let Bjarke do a little bit of talking.
Downtown Manhattan is an architecture born out of a specific moment in New York real estate history, where skyrocketing land value intersected with the advent of steel structure and elevators and transformed a difficult triangular site into one of the most striking landmarks in New York, becoming the namesake for its entire neighborhood. And for us at Big, this is a perfect example of how we like to work. We like our designs to respond to their surroundings. We like them to inherit their attributes from the challenges and the potentials of their environments. Like, for instance, this Courtsraper in Manhattan that combines a courtyard with the density of a skyscraper, creating a wall pyramid on the waterfront of the city. So essentially, our buildings end up looking different purely because they perform differently. Say, for instance, this financial center in Tianjin that inherits a stalagmite silhouette from the structural challenges of building taller than half a kilometer. Or this observation tower in Phoenix that allows the visitors to experience a three-dimensional 360-degree panorama of the surrounding city, almost like a heavenly body hovering above the desert. And finally, that brings us to Vancouver. The first time I arrived in Vancouver, I drove across the Granville Bridge, and I was struck by the beauty of the urban panorama of the slender glass towers rising against the backdrop of the sea and the mountains. And right here where Granville Bridge trifles, we've been invited to reimagine the gateway to the sea. This is already a sited transformation. Granville Bridge is being transformed into this pathway, cousin to the High Line in New York. And right where this new promenade touches downtown, it's going to create a new urban oasis, which is going to become our new neighborhood. So first of all, we thought, why don't we reimagine the traditional urban podium and turn it into a lively village full of alleyways and plazas for like a dense, lively urban environment of like restaurants and retail underneath a green carpet of grassy roofs and under the canopy of the bridges. And for the tower, there's a general 30-meter setback requirement from all the bridges to ensure that nobody lives too close to the bridge, reducing our tower to this like tall, slender triangle, but also to respect the neighboring park. We have to sort of receive our silhouette to ensure that they get daylight and sunshine, reducing our footprint to only 600 square meters. But then we were thinking, if the 30-meter setback has to do with ensuring a minimum distance, as soon as we rise above and beyond the bridges, we can actually come back out and maximize the areas with the greatest views and the most abundant sunlight. So it almost becomes like this tower turned upside down that actually grows out of a tight spot in the lively city and then expands to occupy the maximum area in the surrounding skyline. In a way, you can see Vancouver House as a contemporary Canadian evolution of the Flatiron that takes the residential high-rise one step further into the future.
So again, this is, I think, a great project to kind of demonstrate a lot of the kind of conceptual work, how we actually derived to the shape, what were the challenges, mostly regulatory, but then how do you overcome them? How do you build the kind of narratives that allow people to think differently? And then again, that kind of idea of like, this is like a step into the future of what's possible. Because literally the client is now looking at other ways of finding sites that offer him the same opportunities. So that's what I mean also about the futures actually all around us. 770,000 square feet. We are in New York, one of the projects that Björk had just mentioned, in Via, which is on the west side of New York. It is in many ways a kind of encapsulation of the entire city, where you have the Central Park on the urban scale, and then our courtyard on the building scale. So it's this idea of taking a certain certain traditional typologies like the skyscraper on a podium from New York, combine it with a courtyard from Europe, and you get a Courtsraper. Again, our hope is that these typologies actually live on and are riffed upon by others. Because we do believe that there are certain qualities in a Courtsraper that you just can't beat. So here it's a project that also developed by being a good neighbor to the building behind us, so that you acknowledge that building and you offer 70% of the views that could have been blocked, and maintaining and keeping those. So and then I think we believe that architecture is growing in scales. The sites are becoming larger. Cities are asking for larger plots to be considered. A project like the LA River is even considered as a single kind of project. And so we need to start thinking about how we think of systems and how we think of the buildings and the networks that actually make all of this possible. So the actual courtyard is about 13,000 times smaller, but it's the same proportions as Central Park. And then the activities in that courtyard are very similar to what you would find in Central Park, like a meadow, places to grill, water features, and different kind of fauna, a natural sort of granite pathway as well as a brick pathway. And then imagine living in Hell's Kitchen, and the first things that you hear when you wake up in the morning are birds chirping outside your window. It's kind of not necessarily the kind of New York lifestyle that people that they kind of always imagine. So these projects, and also I think it's important to state that 20% of those units are affordable units, 80% market rate. That's very typical in New York. So a lot of our projects, the one in Vancouver has built a unit of housing in Cambodia for every unit that was sold in Canada. There are also very creative ways in which to actually work on affordability and equity within the industry and also within the clients that you work with. 960,000 square feet, so we're reaching 1 million almost. This is in Shenzhen. It also finished this year. We're actually finishing 16 projects this year. That is tripling our our output that we had amassed in the first 17 years, and now we're tripling it in 1 year. So Shenzhen is what we would call a kind of tropical modernism. So this is a high-rise built within a tropical environment. So if you look at the glass towers to the left of Shenzhen Tower, that's what a lot of Western towers and Western designs look like that are built either in sort of in the Middle East and or in tropical environments like Shenzhen. And we're saying that we should actually be designing buildings that think about the climate, the local conditions. So in this case, you are looking at an opaque kind of skin, but the skin is actually serrated. So there are glazed portions looking north, and then opaque units looking south. You can see it here in this rendering. So it's not rocket science. These are kind of like very simple moves. By creating that serrated kind of facade, you are reducing the heat gain by over 30% in the offices. So the offices, of course, have one primary direction to look out, but they're still getting tons of daylight into the spaces. Here's some images of the lobby and of a higher level where we've also pulled back the facade to have a larger window looking out. So this is, for us, a really important kind of building and design, because we believe, if you remember our Hot to Cold exhibition about 5 years ago, was all about how we build to a specific climate, and that our concepts are derived and driven by those ideals. 3.6 million square feet. This is with Google. So Google, now we're building 8 different projects around the world. Google is driven by kind of scale and size. So the innovative work that happens in a team is generally between 12 and 16 people. But then they also work within teams and communities and neighborhoods, and then all the way up to a town. So their buildings that we're designing for them are anywhere from 3,000 to 8,000 people working in a single building. So then all the ancillary spaces like meeting rooms, kitchens, bathrooms are all located underneath. And then we basically pull apart these different terraces, and we create sort of courtyards where we also grow landscape on the interior. And then have vertical circulation so that you identify with those different courtyards. And then this is all covered by a kind of a dome. We call it a squome, a square dome, which is then again flexible PV panels that are being utilized for the very first time. So this is then sitting on different parts of Mountain View. We have 4 of these going up right now. This is the master plan. Just adjacent is the Googleplex. That was the former Sun Microsystems that was then turned into Googleplex. And again, these spaces are really, the Mountain View locality has asked for a lot of porosity. So this is not the Apple campus. This is not a fortress. You're going to literally be able to walk through the campus, and the Googlers will have, of course, access to the entire building, whereas the local citizens will have different areas that they congregate in. But the idea is really to be really working in a very large space, almost, I would say, a Buckminster Fuller space that he imagined in like the 1960s, of just these large, expansive spaces. The natural light is coming in through those clear stories. This is the ground level that has all of the ancillary spaces, and then these are the courtyards where you then move up to your different desks. So here's the PV shingles. Here's the roof under construction, and these are sort of now enclosed or getting close to being enclosed, and some of the spaces that you're starting to see inside, mimicking the spaces that we've been seeing. So here's all four of them kind of under construction. And one of the cool things about working for a company like Google is that they continuously challenge us on utilizing tools. So we think we are using some of the kind of the newest and the craziest gadgets and tools, but they really push us. So this is a project that we're co-developing with UN Studio in Europe, ourselves, and with Squint Opera. Some of you may know them as an animation company. Through the kind of pushing of Google. And this is an idea of like just how we plan on sort of working in the future in a kind of augmented space.
You have received an updated 3D model for the architect. There are two conflicts with the landscape design.
Web desktop. Activate hyperform.
Hyperform activated.
Show me project 1280.
So this is basically your desktop.
Projects content.
These are the layers.
Load the landscape file. Show me plot 3.
Displaying plot 3.
Now display 3D models.
New model set 1 minute ago.
Okay. Right, load. Highlight design conflict.
Displaying conflict.
Activate slice tool. Activate tree tool. Morning, Jordan. Good morning. Yeah, it wasn't too bad. Just a couple of things. Hyperform. Activate real world scale.
Activating.
Activate slice tool. Tree tool.
You received an updated 3D model. There are 37 conflicts with your landscape design.
Yeah, we all know that, right? So this is, I think, for us a really fun way. And again, you know, here in Los Angeles, there are plenty of architects really working at the forefront of technology and seeing how the different things and leaps of technology kind of work together with architecture. I remember being and sitting right here in the library, and then, you know, just learning about what Gary Technologies was doing just down a couple of blocks. So I think what we're noticing is that the tech companies are getting very interested in the construction space. They just see it as another billion-dollar kind of frontier. But both on the construction side and on the tools side, I think there are going to be some pretty massive moves kind of happening in our lifetime. So this is kind of our means and approach of integrating some of the things that Google is asking us to do and finding a way to actually make it happen. 4 million square feet. This is something that just opened last week. This is the power plant. This is a 1960s power plant. The Danes have, it's a little country, 4.5 million, 5.5 million people with, you know, little amounts of land. So they have no land for landfill. So all the trash that they've been making over the last 50 to 60 years, has been burned to create electricity and heat for the residents. And they have become world leaders in this technology. So the old plant is now basically out of date. So everything that you see there is being replaced by what you see here in the front. And there was a competition a few years ago where they literally just wanted to pretty up the power plant so it would fit nice into a dainty landscape or a photograph of Copenhagen. And that's what we were tasked with as architects, was just to create a wrapper. Soon the engineers were telling us that if you want to build a wall that wraps this, you're going to have to also, support the top. So that would suddenly create a roofscape. And so we were creating this massive roofscape to just make sure that the walls wouldn't fall down. And then suddenly we just basically decided to put something on top of the roof. It just didn't make any sense to leave it just there. So, a 3 kilogram bag of trash is equal to 4 hours of light and 5 hours of heat. This building itself is going to be one of the largest buildings in the history of Copenhagen or in Denmark. Of course, Denmark is Scandinavian, so it has 3 months where it can and does snow at times. And you have mountains of trash, even though it's the flattest country in Europe. So why not graft a ski slope on top of this mountain of trash? So that's the concept that went into the competition. I don't think we gave ourselves a glimmer of hope that we would be chosen, but we won. And I think we won because of the director. It was really one person that made the decision. And she just basically asked the question that every power plant in her experience was met with NIMBYism and not in my backyard. And as you can see, there are a lot of people living right close by to this. So she thought that with the ski slope that there would not be a single soul that would ever reject this power plant. And boy, was she right. They usually spent millions of dollars in lawyer fees and legal fees to just get through all of the negativity and the friction. And in this case, they could spend 100% of that budget on actual useful things that people can actually enjoy. So it's also important to kind of figure out in projects actually where's the money going and how can you sometimes allocate and funnel monies that are being spent and used in one way in an entirely different way that's much more productive for our society. So then we were also inspired by this area just around the power plant. Has wakeboarding, it has go-karting, it has a lot of aquatic kind of sports. And since we have this large facility, and you can see here the structure that was holding up the roof and also the walls is pretty intense. This is where the trash goes. It gets dumped into this. These guys pick it up and then put it into the furnace. And then there you can see the kind of ski slope area. So it's a recycled plastic kind of surface that even the alpine skiers use these days because there's no snow in the Alps sometimes to practice. And then when the snow comes, it acts as a kind of insulator and kind of maintains and also grooms the slopes. So this has now been active as of a week. You also have a climbing hill that you can climb if you're not a skier. And it's really become a part of the city's kind of, skyline. So it's now not only a power plant, it's also something that the citizens of Copenhagen really identify with. 10 million square feet. So we're getting close to the end. This is, of course, Manhattan, 1930s. It is probably a great diagram of just capitalism right here. So if you just look at the entire waterfront is an active waterfront. People did not live by the waterfront because they would literally be run over by a train, or they would have trucks beeping and people yelling. So that's why Central Park actually was developed as a kind of place, repose, and the lands and also the value of property was the highest along the furthest inland into Manhattan. So that, of course, has changed over the last 15 years. The entire kind of edge of the city is transformed from the west side to Battery Park, over to the east side, Governor's Island, Brooklyn Bridge Park. It's just fascinating and fabulous what has been done in a couple of decades. So when Sandy hit 7 years ago, it was shocking for the city. $20 billion of damage just to the city of New York. And everything in light gray is what kind of flooded or was susceptible to flood. And then we came up with an idea. This was a kind of national design competition. 120 teams globally entered. And we came up as the design team to address Manhattan flood management. And we came up with the big U, the idea that you could actually do something that is pure infrastructure, meaning basically flood management, and not forget the people. So what activities do these people need? What's missing on the edge of Manhattan? So we kind of deep dived and looked at all of the things that were missing in each of the neighborhoods, and we brought in a 10-mile long bike path that doesn't cross a single street. We brought in all kinds of activities for the Lower East Side, where it's the part of New York with the fewest square feet of public space. And then we also thought of sort of creating urban furniture that becomes flood protection in times of need. So the first 2.5 miles of the 10-mile design are starting construction now to the tune of $1.2 billion. So that this is Stuyvesant Cove Park will look like this in about 4 to 5 years, and will protect the city up to about 16 feet of sea surge or sea level. So Sandy crested at 12 feet, to give you an indication. So ESCR is the first bit. The city has already found teams to design the 2 bridges. They've just selected the financial district, and there's a private team working on the Battery Park City. So, de Blasio has said that the city is committing $10 billion to resiliency planning. That's also to just sort of say that you may be sitting here thinking of architecture as like designing buildings. I'm here to tell you that it could also be so much more. And don't let engineers design your cities, because then you end up with a bunch of freeways. Design your cities, design your infrastructure. Think of anything as a kind of design problem, and that you have the wits and the wherewithal to actually contribute to that. We're up in a crazy amount of space, but we've been working on a new paradigm of public transportation, where you look, nothing ever is constant. I think that's the most important thing to realize. And just as there have been advancements in all of these different technologies and modes of transportation, flight is not the end-all, be-all. So by looking at Hyperloop, it's yet again reducing the amount of time and the speed of which to travel. So this is, of course, a kind of vacuum tubes and movement, again, is nothing new. If you enter into a 1920s building in downtown LA, they'll have these little mail tubes that you stick in the little tube, and the mail goes all the way up the entire building. So that kind of frictionless kind of travel has been around. It's just not been people moving through those. Elon Musk a few years ago put the idea as a kind of open source idea. And there have been 3 to 4 companies that have been actively going after it. I think Hyperloop Technologies is based here in LA. We're working with Hyperloop One, which is based in Las Vegas. And there are feasibility studies happening all around the world with different technology companies and with different municipalities. We've done a project for the Emirates Transportation Department, looking at one that basically connects Abu Dhabi with Dubai. So this gentleman is going to get an SMS from his wife. Are you coming to your parents' anniversary. He's about 2.5 hours away, and he needs to be there in 30 minutes. So he's checking his options. Whoops, Hyperloop, he can get there in 12 minutes. So he reserves his pod, grabs a cup of coffee. So the idea of these pods is that they are anywhere from 4 to 6 seaters. The pods, 4 pods enter into a cylinder. The cylinder then enters into the tube into a vacuum environment. Is put into motion and travels at around 800 miles an hour. So these pods are not only just pods at the station, they actually are autonomous vehicles, so they can literally offer door-to-door service. So different aspects of all of this are being tested. Right now, I think the Las Vegas test track is tested up to about 500 miles an hour. So here's the test track, as you can see, and they continuously try sort of higher and higher speeds, and they're also putting the first person into it quite shortly. The feasibility study that seems to be the most real is actually in Mumbai to Pune. So, it's also wonderful that the future is actually happening in other places than you would expect. And it's not going to be in the United States, it's actually going to be halfway around the world. So we, again, look kind of a little bit further into the future and are seeing how these networks could actually start to connect regions, countries for sure, and really offer us a kind of global view of connecting places and things. So that gets me back to kind of just thinking about the planet and the resources that we have here. They are finite. And so we probably use 2 to 3 of these worlds of resources right now, if everyone were to live at the same level as you or I, and that's of course not sustainable and not where we should be heading. So the cry of actual really thinking about how the building environment, how we in our significant roles can actually start to address this, is I think what gatherings like this are kind of all about. So we're planning we feel that there's a moment right now where for the first time there is enough data and information around the world in little bits and pieces that have never been collected into a single source of place. So we're thinking of creating a master plan for the planet called Master Planet, where you would in real time be able to see satellite imagery of forests depleting, of our natural resources being used, of shipping containers moving in one direction or another, of the embodied energy of say, cement, and where does the sand come from Australia? Does that make sense to ship halfway around the world? So that you can start to make decisions that you're making in your specific projects or your clients with this real data. So we think, again, that the data exists, it's just in different places, and we're trying to find a way to kind of collect all of that in order to create a more informed kind of future. And projects like this are ways for us to kind of also think about what master planet can be. So the UN has asked us to think about providing amphibious architecture and or sort of floating cities of up to 10,000 people. This is, of course, thinking about all of the Pacific islands that are being basically within our lifetime uninhabitable. So we are working with the New York University, with a lot of great people within the UN to map out different strategies that people have used to live in extreme environments. Again, to look at ecology in many ways, to be inspired by the 17 sustainability goals, and then to just sort of come back to people and to thinking of what exactly people need in order to survive. What is the food requirements, the waste requirements, the energy requirements to allow for a 3-generation or more family to live, and what kind of technologies already exist in food production and so forth. So this is a way for us to kind of map out. We then think about kind of what, again, you could say the urban rigor on a much smaller scale has all of these things as well. Now we need to sort of take that to a much, much larger scale. And this is, of course, just research for the time being. We're hoping to have the chance with the UN to actually build one of these as a prototype. The buildings themselves are umbrellas that shade the actual facades. We have PV panels. We look at using materials that are of a place. We arrange the buildings to sort of, again, respond to their climates. And then I'm just going to go through this very quickly, but it's really to look at what is necessary to create a city of 10,000 people. What are the sciences telling us in food production? And very quickly you'll notice that having a meat diet is really unsustainable if you are stuck on the water. So you're looking at a pescatarian diet and or sort of ocean foods. And so that means also changing people's diets, and we looked at like how many calories people need, what do those calories then need in terms of space in order to create the food production, and then how you arrange a kind of, again, a social kind of arrangement between these spaces to create an archipelago and then even more kind of ancillary spaces. And with that, I will conclude. So thank you very, very much. Do we do question and answer? All right, so there's a little question and answer phase. I had maybe 17 or 18 of you as students today, so I know you ask questions. And anybody else that would like? Back there. A microphone is on its way.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your talk and your time. You mentioned a lot of the different technologies that you use, as well as introduce some new technologies such as new vocabularies. So I'm wondering, my question is, do you ever consider language a technology that it's also a building block, or if it's particular to your projects and if it's at all an influence to your space?
That's a really good question, because I don't know, I had a workshop today with Jeffrey and Abba, and maybe the students will nod their heads that I was kind of very much about the words they use to describe their work. Because I think you need to be just as clear in words and the choice of words that you use as you are in the kind of graphic and sensibilities that you have. So I do think that language and the use of language is very important in building consensus, in getting people to understand what it is that you're trying to do. It was said before that one of the things is our communication, and I think we don't actually think about it as communication, or some people also say like marketing. It's absolutely not. I think that Bjarke and everyone at Big sees the narrative of a project the same as a kind of a tool as a CAD system or anything else. It's like one more thing. You may know that Bjarke's first company was called Plot, right? So it was called Plot because a plot is a site, a plot of land. A plot is used to plot out a drawing, and any good story or any good building needs a good plot, narrative. So it's the word works on 3 levels, and I think that already showed at that stage that was a very important element in how to communicate. Yes.
Wonderful, but I think the question that I have for you,
Yeah.
the same question that Francis Perkins asked Richard Neutra, which is, this is wonderful, but what do you do for the social worker who's retired, who's watching the city become completely unaffordable, who makes too much for, quote, affordable poor people's housing, but not nearly enough to stay? And you're really sitting there and watching and saying, am I 4 steps away from really living in my car, though I don't want to? But if I get to that level, I'll get housing. So how do you build, when I looked at Google, I lived in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And at the height of San Francisco as a social worker, we lost funding because, quote, there was no money for social service, okay? So I look at Google and say, I don't want that in my backyard.
Yeah.
Because how am I going to survive? Because we got a little bit for homeless, a tiny little bit for homeless, but all we're doing is building for the wealthy and making, where in 2012 a social worker could buy a condominium in Los Angeles. In 2012, you hope to hell you can hold on to their rental apartment. And if not, you're moving to Palm Springs.
Yeah. I have an answer to you.
Good, that's what I want to know.
Yeah,
because
vote.
Go.
Because what you're describing is literally what your representatives have been placed into office to create the policies that actually have created that divide. This country has the largest kind of divide between wealth and being poor and unable to sustain yourself. So I think as you do see that equitable life is the responsibility of all of us, and we all are either too young to take care of ourselves, and we're all going to reach an age where we're too old to take care of ourselves. And so it's, I think, really important to create equitable lifestyles that take into account all ages and all creeds and all people. And I think that is something that the American system, I believe, does not represent. If I look at the Congress, and I were to say, does this represent all of the people's, where are the social workers in Congress? Where are the architects in Congress? That should be a house that represents all of us. It's mostly lawyers and doctors. So those professions are then also extremely well represented in all of the issues that they actually care about. So my answer to you is become and I'm sure you are, because you sound like
I'm an old guy who's got a lot of time.
Yeah, but
other
become
piece
an
of it-
active citizen, and then enrich and teach everybody about representative government. But the reason it works in places like Scandinavia is that 80% of the people vote in Scandinavia. They care, and Congress is made up of people as young as like 24 years old, because they represent the young people's visions of their future. And again, that's where I look at our Congress, and it's a very narrow kind of value system that is represented in.
So's our governor.
Yeah, but I mean, to me, it's a political decision, and that's why also policy is important. I mean, I think the planning department was a very important part of UCLA when I was here, and Edward Soja was teaching postmodern geographies. I learned so much from planners at this school that have also influenced the way that I think, because there was a collective will or a collective kind of responsibility that was taught in the hallways here.
Hey, so congratulations. Really impressed with the presentation. And, I think one can't stress enough that you guys did this within one lifetime, and you're competing with, offices that are comprised of dead people's last names. This is really, I think it's important that this is stressed, and you're doing this. And at the beginning of your presentation, you were talking about, learning how to build, learning how to, blow glass, how to pour cement and so forth. But then this is maybe a comment and a thought that's related to the first question. How to build almost is becoming more about your handling of paperwork. It seems to me that how to build is not just about the bricks and mortars, but how you convince people and how you construct the paperwork in order to make this happen. And I wonder if you have some thoughts about that.
I truly believe that the paperwork part of life has always been there. I remember when I was in Italy during some study trips. And you would see the overwhelming amount of work that a person like Michelangelo would do. Kind of a question would just arise and just say, how did that one person, how were they able to do all of this? And then you do a little bit of reading and you find out, well, Michelangelo was the school of Michelangelo, and the school of Michelangelo was 200 assistants, and then, who knows how many other kind of administrative people. So what Michelangelo actually did was create an inspiring kind of environment for people to kind of excel and go beyond what their own limits were to create something that is memorable. And I think that what Bjarke and Big are about is actually creating an environment for people of all different. I think I once counted up, we have 40 different degrees split out between 600 people, and those degrees are in the most mundane and also esoteric sort of things, because that's what's needed. I mean, an architecture office is not just an architect working. Even when I worked in an office of 20 people in Seattle, Washington, Ed Weinstein probably spent a third of his day just dealing with paperwork and with the daily grind of running an office. So I saw it in Ed Weinstein's office. I saw it when I was traveling around and just sort of seeing things. And so I think one other UCLA story is that I went to the architecture school, but I actually considered the entire campus my school, my university. So Anderson Business School was exactly across the street back then, and I would take classes there, at least one, if not two, a semester. So consumer behavior, entrepreneurship. There was one class that was just 15 CEOs coming and telling their story. And so, for me, business and the entrepreneurial spirit and all of those things were as important as the classes that I took right here in the school. And so I think that in a way, it's sometimes frowned upon or shamed that one talks about the paperwork side. But I think it's an incredible creative outlet. You know, contracts is where everything starts. If you understand the linguistics of contracts, you can move mountains in terms of what you can do. So I highly encourage you guys to. Anderson's a little further away now, I hear, but please pop in. They don't always check roll call or names, so you can just sit in the back and listen in. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. I have a question in terms of sustainability. How is BIG decreasing its carbon footprint in terms of the construction process or the resources that are used to make each structure? For example, the cabin with the wood, where did that wood come from?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my question.
I mean, I think there's no answer that's like the silver bullet and answers everything. So we use cement. I'm sorry. We use a lot of it. But I think that our approach has always been, Bjarke said it best with hedonistic sustainability, that sustainability shouldn't be a Puritan approach to sustainability where you're doing less of something, having thicker walls, smaller windows. If it's about a Puritan approach, then life kind of sucks. Life is going to get less and less interesting. So our approach has always been to look at where can you raise the quality of life and where can you reduce the amount of energies? How can you look for further ways of circular economies so that you're using something multiple times and not a throwaway kind of society? And that's been our approach, I would say, for the past 15 years and has informed all of our projects. We have been certified in over 10 certification systems, from Swiss Minenergie to Estidama in the Middle East, to CABE, to Green Star, to LEED, to BREEAM, to DGNB. So we work within all of those sustainability certification systems, but our approach is still to really think beyond that. And to create kind of our own kind of approach to that. So we hopefully are demonstrating that we walk the talk.
Thanks so much for coming and giving this great lecture. My question is, at the beginning you showed a very interesting path, what you made, looking into all the different materials and learning yourself how to build and what materials and craftsmanship mean. And then I thought, when I saw the video of the Hyperform tool, kind of visualizing of 2028, the cubicle room and everything being digital, if that's the vision for how we will work in 2028, I thought, wow, where does all the material kind of knowledge, what you gained, go in these next 10 years, and what does craftsmanship essentially mean in 10 years? Maybe you can give us some of your thoughts.
Yeah, I don't have an answer, but I for myself, I think these things change with time. So, glass blowing has been pretty much constant and the same for over 2,000 years since the Romans invented it. And you could say that there will still be glass blowers around, but there just won't be many of them. We're gonna further industrialize. We're gonna further do things with machines and such. But I think that the craft of making and doing things still exists. It's just you have to transfer those things to the kind of new approaches and the new ways of doing things. But there's still going to be people who whittle wood. There's still going to be people who, will maintain a sort of craft-led life. Thank God we're not all architects, that there are other people out there doing things. I think some of you guys are probably raring to go and hungry, so I'm going to end it there. If you still have questions, I'm going to just stay up here for a moment, and then you guys can ask there. Is that good? All right.